What's up, Vibes players? I am the Mudman, and today we're going to be taking Yellow YumYum to the extreme. Now, I've been playing Yellow for the past couple of months, and after the Zonals tournament in Hartford, Connecticut a couple of weeks ago, it really opened my eyes to all the possibilities Yellow has to offer. And since that tournament, I've been in the kitchen just cooking up a bunch of really cool Yellow decks that I'm very excited to share with you all today. But before we get into any cool Yellow decks, we first have to look at a boring old humdrum normal Yellow list. Alright, so here we have a super standard Yellow list. Nothing fancy, no cool tech cards, all 4-ofs, just something that you would expect to see on ladder. And now I'm assuming that most of the viewers have a good understanding of how the Yellow YumYum deck works, so I'm just going to go over the base strategy really quickly. The main reason why you'd want to play Yellow is they have a lot of card draw. Most of the card draw is conditional, however, and that's found in the form of your PenguinWhoMightBringaPlusOne, as well as your ChecktheYellowPages. PenguinWhoMightBringaPlusOne is a 2-cost yellow penguin with 2 vibe. When you play him, you flip over the top card of your deck. If it's a penguin with 2 fish costs or less, you keep it. If it's not, you put it on the bottom of your deck. ChecktheYellowPages is a 3-cost action. You flip over the top 3 cards of your deck, and you keep any yellow penguins you find that way. Any non-yellow penguins go to the bottom of your deck. And as you can see, we have quite a few yellow penguins, and we also have quite a few cheap penguins. Specifically, we have 24 penguins that work with the +1 penguin, and 36 penguins that work with the ChecktheYellowPages. So we pretty consistently hit, right, almost half the deck is +1able at 24, and way more than half the deck is yellow pageable at 36. But as you can see, a couple of these penguins have a fish cost of more than 2, so they must be really good to make their spot in the deck despite not working with your +1 penguin. The first one is ExtrovertPenguin. ExtrovertPenguin costs 4 and has 2 vibe, but every time you play a penguin, it gets +2 vibe forever. And seeing as your strategy involves playing lots of penguins every turn, he grows really quickly. Another more than 2 fish penguin is LuckyPenguin. LuckyPenguin has 4 vibe and costs 3, and when this penguin gets iced, you get to take a penguin from your ice that cost, or with vibe count 2, and put it back into play. So far, we've only talked about 2 penguins, and they both have 2 vibe, so that card seems pretty good. And then finally, we have the PenguinWhoDoesntMindGoodbyes. This is your most expensive penguin. It's also probably your best penguin. It costs 6, it has 6 vibe, and whenever another yellow penguin gets iced, you draw a card. And that happens quite a lot between your opponent's popcorn penguins and your own board clears. You end up drawing a ton of cards. In my experience, it's usually between about 7 and 20 cards, depending on how many goodbye penguins you have in play. Now you have a few more important penguins, not anywhere near as strong as the ones that we mentioned, but some honorary penguins would be like PenguinWhoZooms. This costs 1, and when you play him, you get to put a penguin back in your hand. You can pick +1 penguin to play him again, that's really great, and just playing penguins more is great for your extrovert penguin as well. We also have your PenguinWho'sLatetotheParty. If you have more than 3 penguins than your opponent at the time of playing this, it gets +6 vibe, being an 8 vibe penguin. This is a really good card against green, or really any archetype that's playing Popcorn Penguin Inspiring Story, because if you win the early vibe checks, you'll get to 6 rods at the same time they're establishing their popcorn, and if you can play your good vibe penguin as they're playing Popcorn Penguin, then you nullify all the bad stuff that the Popcorn Penguin is doing. Let's see, we also have DaydreamingPenguin. It's a little bit of removal, but it's mostly just card draw in combination with your goodbye penguin. But besides that, most of the other penguins are pretty self-explanatory. So let's jump into the actions. The first one is NotYourKeys. This costs 4, and it ices a penguin. That's really great, easy to wrap your head around. We also have PutYourFlippersintheAir. Now, PutYourFlippersintheAir could be buddy-ups. It could be a combination of flippers and buddy-ups. Right now, there's a lot of Silent Snow Globes in the meta, and Silent Snow Globes turns off buddy-ups, so we're going all in on the flippers. The flippers lets you choose a penguin, then you count how many yellow penguins you have, double that number, and then add that number to one of your penguins' vibe for just 1 turn. So it's really good in scenarios where you didn't get an extrovert or your extrovert got destroyed, and so you have to turn one of your little guys into a big guy to win the game. The final action card that we have is YumYum, which costs 5 and just ices all penguins, and if you play YumYum with your goodbye on the board, you draw a card for each penguin destroyed, and that's really great. But so that's essentially it for like the base strategy of the yellow list. But now we're going to take a look at the best performing yellow list from the Hartford tournament, which is teched out like crazy, and see how it compares consistency wise with the +1 penguins as well as the ChecktheYellowPages. Alright, so here is the best performing yellow list from the Zonals tournament in Hartford. It was piloted by this guy. This is his name in the client. I'm not really sure how it's supposed to be pronounced, but he is a great player, seems like a good guy as well. And this testing group realized that your action cards aren't affected by your yellow pages or your +1 penguins, so if you remove action cards, you can replace them with anything you want, and won't hurt the consistency very much. And as you can see, this deck is teched out a lot. There are 2 BounceHouseRods, 1 Bunkus, and of course the 3 MissPlaceForgetterofThings, for a grand total of 6 tech cards in this yellow deck. 6 cards that are not little yellow penguins, and despite all of that, there are still 23 +1 penguin candidates, as well as 35 yellow page candidates. So despite having all of these tech cards, it's only 1 card less consistent from each of these cards' perspectives, which is a really big deal. And we saw, this was the best performing yellow list. The +1s hit, the yellow pages hit. And when I got home from Hartford, I was really excited to try this list out on the ladder, and as you would expect, the +1s hit and the yellow pages hit. Right, so now that we've seen that this deck works and that these counts of 23 and 35 work, it puts us in a position where we can finally tech out yellow for whatever we want, right? But that got me thinking, what if we use this same tactic of removing action cards, and instead of replacing them with cool tech cards, what if we just replace them with even more little yellow penguins for even more card draw? And that's how I got to this next deck here. Alright, so now we have our first extreme yellow deck of the night. And this deck is not extreme because of any crazy tech cards. This one's extreme because it draws so aggressively. I've named this deck Never Miss because it's entirely predicated on your +1 penguins hitting, as well as your yellow pages going 3 for 3 as often as possible. And this deck is built like a race car. As you can see, we removed all of the unnecessary action cards. We're down to just 2 Put Your Flippers in the Air, which I think is extremely fair. In my experience, you usually need between 0 and 1 Flippers in the Air to win. It's generally like a secondary or even like tertiary win condition, but it is a decent card to have. It makes a lot of checkmate scenarios where if your opponent does get rid of your big extrovert, you can just make another thing big and win the game anyway. We're also down to just 3 copies of YumYum. Now, in my opinion, 3 is the perfect amount of YumYums anyway. All of my yellow YumYum lists have 3, so I'm real happy with that. And then that brings us to probably the most controversial part of this list, which is only 2 copies of NotYourKeys. And NotYourKeys is a really great card. It's usually a 4 of in all yellow decks, right? But seeing as that this deck is so fast, even faster than your normal aggro yellow, right, you have less turns to play your NotYourKeys, and realistically, if you think about it, how many points of single target removal do you really need in any point in the game, right? Like maybe your opponent has 1 problematic penguin, maybe you want to stop Walk the Runway or an Adventure Squad, but as long as you're just significantly more cognizant of when you're using your NotYourKeys, I have found that 2 feels fine, and on top of that, it's not like your only removal is keys. You still have 3 copies of YumYum, and by the time you've used both of your NotYourKeys, you're probably ready to YumYum with your Goodbye Penguin pre-established. So I've played dozens of games on the ladder so far with this list, and I have not felt like I've needed more keys really in any scenario. And by removing all of these action cards, we've made room for 2 new penguins. The first one is PenguinOftheFallingLeaves, which might look like a textless card, but in reality it's actually really broken. See, as you can see, it has 2 fish cost, which means you can draw it off your +1 penguin. On top of that, it's yellow, which means you can draw it off your yellow pages. So right off the bat, this card's nuts. It works with everything you want. But there's a little bit more. As you can see, this card has 4 vibe naturally, which means it's a great target for your flippers because it can't get gobbled, right? So this card is really great. It really ups the consistency a lot. And then the other penguin that we've made room for is the Inquisitive Penguin, which may not be yellow, but he is small enough for the +1 penguin to draw, and Inquisitive Penguin is really, really strong. It has a multitude of use cases, but there are 2 primary use cases. The first one is very obvious. You can play it alongside your Extrovert Penguin when you have 4 rods, and that way your Extrovert Penguin can start growing a turn earlier without having to worry about any opposing goblins. The other thing that it does is when you're playing against like Popcorn Penguin eccentric decks, they often win the early vibe checks, which means they can establish their Popcorn Penguin a turn or 2 before you can play your Goodbye Penguin, and that's very detrimental for you. But the Inquisitive Penguin puts you in a position where you can buy yourself a turn so that you can get your Goodbye Penguin on the board and you can just draw cards for everything their Popcorn destroys. The Inquisitive Penguin also works well in that same matchup Late to the Party Penguin, helping you get it to 8 vibe on turn 2 so you can win the early vibe checks and get your Goodbye Penguin established earlier. It can also be used in combination with PotStirringPenguin for the elusive turn 2 yellow pages. If you start with a Flying Penguin on turn 1, play a PotStirringPenguin on turn 2, as well as another Flying Penguin or an Inquisitive, you can hit the yellow pages as early as turn 2, and that feels really, really strong. But like I said, I played a lot of games with this list, and I really like it a lot. If you are a fan of YumYum Yellow, I really highly recommend this never miss race car style deck. And in fact, I liked this list so much, I decided to use this as the shell for all of my like crazy teched out yellow decks. So when we get to those in just a minute, you'll find that all of those decks, despite being teched out, are actually more consistent from the +1 and yellow page perspective than that initial classic yellow deck that we looked at. And if you were wondering, there are 30 penguins in this deck that work with the +1 penguin, as well as 39 penguins that work with the Check the Yellow Pages. So at this point, notably more than 50% of the deck works with the +1 penguin, and in my experience, it hits very, very often, and it feels really strong. But now that we've looked at this bare bones style of yellow, let's finally jump into our first teched out yellow list. Oh, just one more thing before we hop on over to the other decks. I almost forgot to go over how the mulligan works. Now luckily the mulligan for this style of deck is really simple. You want as many copies of +1 penguin as you can get. The same is true with Check the Yellow Pages. You'll also keep one extrovert in the mulligan. You'll keep one goodbye penguin in the mulligan. Keep one YumYum in the mulligan. Keep both your keys. Ideally you don't see both in your opening hand, but if you do, yeah, you gotta keep both. There's only 2. You can think about keeping a Put Your Flippers in the Air, and then everything else you toss away. Now you may have noticed a trend here. All the cards that we're keeping in the mulligan, besides +1 penguin, are cards that +1 penguin puts on the bottom of the deck. And now we're not doing that because of +1 penguin, it's just coincidental, right? Like we said in the beginning with the classic YumYum list, your best penguins are extrovert and goodbye penguin, and you want your best penguins, they're the best. And then we're keeping the actions because they're our thinnest resource, right? And if you're worried about this like action-heavy mulligan, right, if on the extremely off chance your opening hand is all actions, then the entirety of the rest of your deck is 2-cost penguins. By the time you have 2 rods, you'll have something to play. And this mulligan guide, for the most part, it's worked really well for me, and it's going to ring true for all the rest of the decks that we show off. The only difference will be you'll also be keeping 1 or more copies of the tech cards that we go over. Alright, and now we have our first extremely teched out yellow deck of the night. As you can see, much like the Hartford Tournament deck, we also have 3 copies of MissPlaceForgetterofThings, really increasing our BizBunk matchup. Now, in my opinion, YumYum Yellow is favored into every matchup except for BizBunk, and this helps greatly. Now, we were able to make room for the MissPlaceForgetterofThings by removing our 2 copies of Inquisitive Penguin, as well as 1 copy of LuckyPenguin. And despite removing those penguins, we still have 28 penguins that work with our +1 penguin, as well as 38 penguins that work with our Check the Yellow Pages. So we've maintained the over 50% ratio that we want for our +1 penguin. And besides the bare bones deck that we just looked at, out of all the lists I'm going to show you today, this is the one that I've played the most, and this list feels really, really good. The misplaces never feel like they get in the way. You're still capable of being extremely aggressive and drawing your penguins very, very quickly. And on top of that, the Misplaced Forgetter of Things is not terrible in other matchups, right? Obviously, it's game-breaking against BizBunk, but it's good for getting rid of like opposing Walk the Runways, for in like the Bash Globe matchup, if you can bait out a Spring a Leak early, you can stop Spring Leaks for the rest of the game. That's really great if your opponent has a problematic penguin like Popcorn Penguin or something like that. You can, remove that from the game state. So it's really, really good. But one thing that is important to note is if you've played Misplaced Forgetter of Things as a tech card in other decks like Green or Bash Globe or Big Blue or whatever, then you're probably used to playing it in a manner where you sort of lock out your BizBunk opponent. Right, usually the first one hits Bunkus, the second one hits Adventure Squad, the third one hits Bismo or Ascending, and then your opponent just can't play the game at all. But because of the nature of Yellow and the fact that it's just so aggressive, I feel like usually your misplaces are just sort of buying you a turn or two, and that's just enough for you to win the game naturally the way that you always do. So in my experience, the first one always picked Bunkus. If you don't pick Bunkus, you probably screwed up. Bunkus is the way they get access to all their purple pudge. It's the way they beat your Extrovert Penguin and vibe checks. You always want to get rid of the Bunkus. And usually it's going to take them like at least 2 action phases to get rid of your misplace, right? And by then you should probably just be winning the game. So don't think of it as a form of like locking out your BizBunk opponents. Just think of it as a way to buy an extra turn or two for you to win the game. But like I said, this deck is really, really fun. I really highly recommend playing it. That being said, I've been around the ladder. I know what the people like. There are other ways to beat BizBunk, so let's check it out. Alright, so our last deck bought turns against BizBunk. This deck simply tells BizBunk no. As you can see, we run 3 copies of Silent Snow Globe. And Silent Snow Globe says for the rest of the game, you're not allowed to play any penguins. That's terrible. But all penguins, both yours and your opponents, lose all abilities. So opposing Bunkuses don't work, opposing Bismos don't work, opposing Ascendings don't work, opposing Popcorns don't work. All of your BizBunk opponent's favorite cards simply become dead cards in the face of Silent Snow Globe. And when you're playing Silent Snow Globe, you've got to run Bashful Swordsman. They're best friends. Bashful Swordsman is a 3-fish, 14-vibe penguin. Now, usually he ices himself after winning the vibe check, but when he loses all his abilities, he's simply a 3-cost, 14-vibe penguin, which is really strong. Now, in order to make room for these 6 cards, as you can see, we have removed all of our Put the Flippers in the Air, which I think is pretty fair, seeing as that Bashful Swordsman and Flippers are filling very similar roles, right? When you're doing your Flippers win con, you're trying to play as many small penguins as you can, and then making one of them big for a turn. Your Bashful Swordsman is just a big penguin for a turn, right? It's filling essentially the same role. 14 is probably slightly smaller than whatever you'll be making with your Flippers, but ideally it's enough to do the job. You'll also notice the Inquisitive Penguins made their way back into the deck. Inquisitive Penguin seems to synergize well with your Bashful Swordsman. If Bashful Swordsman wants you to have 15 or more permanents as quickly as possible to win the game, some 0-cost permanents seem pretty good. On top of that, you can see that our action count has changed a little bit more. We only have 2 YumYums now instead of 3. Seeing as that we're a Silent Snow Globe deck, we're less reliant on YumYum. YumYum and Silent Snow Globe don't work together, as you can't refill your board after you clear it. That being said, you are the person piloting this deck, so the YumYum and the Silent Snow Globe shouldn't get in the way because you decide when they both come down. That being said, you are going to be in scenarios where the YumYum is simply not an option, so we have less of them. Conversely, we have more copies of NotYourKeys, as NotYourKeys becomes much stronger in your post-Snow Globe reality. Also, you may have noticed we now only have 3 copies of Extrovert instead of 4. We're doing that because now we have the copies of Bashful Swordsman. Both of them are, their job is being big boys. They're both big boys. So despite the fact that we're down 1 Extrovert, we're kind of +2 big boys, when it's all said and done. I also think there could be some merit to removing the YumYums entirely and replacing them with either like a 4th NotYourKeys or maybe putting the Flippers back into the deck, right? And just sort of going more into the Silent Snow Globe route. That being said, YumYum is your most impactful action, and like I said before, you decide when the Snow Globe comes down. So realistically, the YumYum is still probably worth the slot. If you were wondering about our yellow pages and +1 counts, we are back up to 30 penguins in the deck that work with our +1 penguin. However, we are down to just 35 yellow page candidates, which is 1 card less than our classic no-tech yellow list. That being said, it's the same number as the Hartford Tournament list, which has proven to work. All that being said, out of all the Xtreme lists that we're going to go over today, this is the one that I played the least. And I'm not 100% confident on the counts of Silent Snow Globe and Bashful Swordsman. It might be worthwhile to go 2-2 instead of 3-3. It also might be worthwhile to just go with 2 of either the Snow Globe or the Swordsman, I'm not really sure. If you do cut the counts of these cards, then it puts you in a position where you could run the 4th NotYourKeys or the 36th Penguin for that more consistency. In my opinion, I prefer the MissPlaceForgetterofThings variant of the anti-BizBunk yellow. That being said, this one is really cool, and I would like to do more experimenting with Bashful Swordsman in yellow, but that's it for our anti-BizBunk decks. The next Extreme Yellow deck you see is going to be absolutely crazy. You're going to go, Mudman, that combination of cards? How did you think of that? Haha, you've been hoodwinked. This deck's not creative or radical. All I did here was throw in Popcorn Penguin and Inspiring Story. And if you've played Vive for more than 5 minutes, you have certainly encountered Popcorn Penguin and Inspiring Story. It's a really strong combination. Popcorn Penguin ices the littlest penguin at the start of action time. If it's a tie, the owner of the Popcorn Penguin gets to pick who gets iced. Inspiring Story buffs all of your penguins by 2 at the start of action time, including your Popcorn Penguin, giving him even more targets to hit. That being said, what if I told you that yellow can do something with Popcorn Penguin Inspiring Story that no other color can do? And I call it Hydra Mode. But before we get into any of the cool Hydra Mode stuff, first we gotta go over our +1 and yellow page ratios. Well, despite having all 7 of these tech cards, we have maintained 28 +1able penguins, as well as 38 yellow checkables. So we are still drawing extremely aggressively despite having all this corn in the deck. But I know what you want to hear, and you want to hear about Hydra time. So, if you have played any Popcorn Penguin centric deck, then you've certainly been in this scenario. You play your Popcorn Penguin, you establish your inspiring story, and there's nothing your opponent can do about it. And now they're in a position where they have to simply wait out your Popcorn Penguin, which is great for you. But that means inevitably you're going to be in a chicken situation, where you can either let your popcorn eat himself, or you can start eating your own penguins. Now, eating your own penguins is pretty bad, because then you have less permanence, and you need permanence to win the game. That being said, if you can get your Penguin Who Doesn't Mind Goodbyes established, every time you eat one of your own penguins, you'll draw another penguin. As you can see, almost all of your deck is small penguins, so when you ice one, you'll almost certainly draw another one. And since you'll be drawing all these cards, inevitably, you'll be getting a second Penguin Who Doesn't Mind Goodbyes. And once you've established the second one, now you're in Hydra mode. And for every one of your own penguins that your popcorn eats, you'll be drawing 2 penguins in its place. So now, if your opponent tries to wait out your popcorn penguin, you'll simply win the game faster and have access to all of your resources, forcing your opponent to play into your popcorn penguin, which is great. Now that being said, like I said, this is 7 cards, so we obviously had to cut a lot of stuff to make room. So as you can see, we are back down to 0. Put your flippers in the air. I think that's fair. As I said before, flippers is a secondary or even tertiary win condition. And we have our inspiring stories to do a little bit of buffing, nowhere near as much buffing as a flippers, but it's still something. We also have no copies of Not Your Keys, right? As you can imagine, we are now a popcorn deck. So we'll be doing all of our single target removal in the form of Popcorn Penguin, but that's not a huge deal, as we still have our 3 copies of YumYum in case the board gets, a little too out of hand. There is one more interesting thing to note with this particular variation of yellow, one more little cherry on top, if you will. So YumYum is a really great card in your deck. It's the namesake of your archetype. And Inspiring Story has a little synergy with the YumYum, right? Inspiring Story is a relic, it's not a penguin. So when you clear the board, the Inspiring Story will stick around, meaning post YumYum you'll have even more permanence and your penguins will be a little bit bigger, which is pretty awesome. Alright, so we're about to look at our final deck, the most crazy bonkers extreme deck out of everyone in this video, and I've got to warn you, this deck is not for the faint of heart. This is Anthony Hawk doing the 1080s level of extreme. You're going to want to sit down for this and point your socks at something durable, because I'm about to knock them off at Mach 5. Here is the most extreme yellow deck ever in creation. 10 tech cards and 2 weirdos. As you can see, we have our 4 Popcorn Penguins, our 3 Inspiring Stories, as well as 3 copies of MissPlaceForgetterofThings. That's right, this deck is BizBunk's worst nightmare. But before we talk about anything, the first thing we gotta go over is our counts for the +1 Penguin as well as the Check the Yellow Pages. Well, despite having all of this nonsense, we've maintained 30 cards for our +1 Penguin to hit, as well as 36 cards for our Check the Yellow Pages, which means when you compare this deck to the first deck that we looked at, the one with no tech cards at all 4 ofs, max consistency, we are hitting the same amount of times with our Check the Yellow Pages as that deck, and we have 6 more +1 candidates than that initial deck. However, you may have noticed something a little bit strange about this deck. In order to fit in all of this weird stuff, we are down to no actions, barring the Yellow Pages, of course. That's right, no YumYums, no keys, no flippers, no nothing. Right, but you guys already know about the misplaces and about the Popcorn Penguin Inspiring Story and about Hydra mode, of course. So, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room in the form of supportive friends. Well, in making this deck, we found ourselves in a bit of a conundrum. Without YumYum, our LuckyPenguin's not very good. And considering we are relying heavily on Popcorn Penguin Inspiring Story, we can't play our other guy, Inquisitive Penguin, which leaves us in a thorny situation. What are we going to put in to replace that? Well, in comes supportive friend, who actually fits really well into this yellow list. Seeing as that we have no more of our WinCon actions, we're putting all of our stock into the Extrovert Penguin. Seeing as he is our only WinCon, I thought it was necessary to throw in a penguin specifically to support our Extrovert Penguin. So, supportive friend penguin is a neutral 2-fish 2-vibe penguin, and when you play him, you get to pick one of your penguins, or I guess an opposing penguin, and buff it by 2 vibe. Extrovert Penguin already gets plus 2 vibe for every penguin you play, so supportive friend buffs him effectively by 4. But the supportive friend really gets out of hand when you put it in combination with Zooming Penguin. With 1 Zooming Penguin and 1 supportive friend penguin, you're getting plus 10 vibe in buff for your Extrovert. And seeing as the Extrovert is our only WinCon, except for maybe a moderately sized penguin who's late to the party, I think it's necessary to throw in the supportive friend. Now, is this the best way to play yellow? No, not even close. That being said, you will find yourself in a situation where you have a popcorn penguin, an inspiring story, a MissPlaceForgetterofThings, and maybe even a supportive friend on the board. And then you're going to go 3 for 3 with your yellow pages, and your opponent's going to pull their hair out. And isn't that what we all want anyway? Alright, well, we've taken yellow to the extreme. I have nothing else to show you. Hopefully you have fun with some of these wacky yellow lists I've gone over. Maybe this even inspired you to come up with your own extreme yellow list. Either way, head on over to the TST Discord to tell us how you've been vibing. The invite link is in the description, as well as all of the deck lists that we went over. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more vibes-related content. And check out our podcast with myself, Caution Fun, and the Professor if you're looking to get more up-to-date vibes news. And yeah, that's about it. Have a great day. Bye!